Hi there everyone, so welcome back to the third part in this Uncast series about Tailscale in Unraid. So let's move on now to my favourite bit, what I've been waiting to tell you guys about, is the Unraid Tailscale integration into individual Docker containers. Okay, so Tailscale and Docker. Now let's go across to the server in the data center in Finland, and we can see here that I've got Jellyfin running here. Now, for those of you who have used Tailscale before on Unraid, you'll know that we can actually access Jellyfin through the web UI when using Tailscale. But if I click on this here and I click web UI, it's not actually going to open. Now, the reason being is because it tries to open it using the local IP address and the port number for that container. So what I could do is I could just put the port number at the end onto the end of the Tailscale IP, and that will get us in straight away. And there you can see my Jellyfin server with one of my favourite TV shows, Andromeda. Okay, so as you can see, whilst we can actually access things through Tailscale running on the server, it's not the actual ideal situation. Now, I'm going to show you something super cool. So let's shut down Jellyfin now, and this will work with any container. If I click onto it and I go to edit here, okay, so now you'll notice in the Docker template that we've got this extra part here. We've got a toggle where we can turn Tailscale on and off. So I'm going to select use Tailscale and set that to on. And first I'm just going to set this up very simply. I'm just going to give it a name. So this is the name that it will be on my tailnet. I'm going to call it Jellyfin. Now for the moment, I'm not going to mention what all of these do. We will come back to that. But one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, where it says Tailscale Serve, I'm just going to, for the moment, put that as no. And you'll see why in a moment. Okay, so if I scroll down to the bottom of the page now and click apply, we can see it says the command has finished successfully. So now I need to click this button here, View Container Log. And so now we can see at the top here, it says to authenticate, visit this address. So all I need to do is to click onto this link and it will open it up in another page. So now what I'm doing is I'm authenticating the Jellyfin container as a separate device on my tailnet. So with that done, I'm just going to visit the console and here we can see Jellyfin is connected. Okay, great. So let's minimize this page here and we can now close the log and we can click done. So what you can see now is we've got a nice little icon here that says Tailscale, giving us information about this node. Okay, so now if I click on Jellyfin here now, we can see we've got two different web UIs. So now if I click on Tailscale web UI, I log straight in. So we're straight into the container through Tailscale without having to amend any ports. And if I click on play on any of my videos, you can see it's working absolutely fine. Okay, so one thing here is if we click on here and go to Tailscale web UI at the moment, we can see here it's accessing Tailscale through its own individual Tailscale IP address for this particular container. Now obviously this is different to the Tailscale IP address for my server, but you'll notice here it says it's not secure. That's because it doesn't have an SSL certificate. It's totally private, but if we wanted to, we could have a fully qualified domain name with an SSL certificate. So let me show you how to do that. So let's go back to the server and click onto the container here and go to edit. And all we need to do is where it says Tailscale Serve, change that from no onto serve. So you can see here it says we need to enable HTTPS on our tailnet account to be able to use either serve or funnel. So let's go across to our Tailscale web UI now. And for that we need to go to DNS. And if we scroll down here, just two things we should check. We want to make sure that Magic DNS is enabled and also, obviously, HTTPS certificates. So let's click on Enable here. Now, there's one thing to notice when Let's Encrypt certificates are created. They basically go on a public ledger. So all certificates created, they are visible to the public. But to see them, obviously, you'd need to know the Tailscale domain, or really any domain for that matter, and you go to a website such as crt.s8 and paste in the domain and click search, and that will tell you currently if any certificates are being created for this domain. And at the moment, none have been created. And normally after you've created a certificate, it will take anything between 1 and 4 hours to show on this site. Okay, so let's go back now. So you may be wondering, why would anyone actually be worried about a certificate being public record? Well, for me here, my host name is called Jellyfin, so that's all someone's going to know. But imagine if I was a company and maybe I had, a private name for a certain computer, like maybe a government computer, and I didn't really want anyone to be able to look up that name. So just remember, whatever name that you choose for your devices on your Tailnet, if you create a certificate for them, they are actually public record. And if someone knew your Tailnet name, they could search this name and then see what devices are registered with certificates. But really, not much of a big deal, so just something to keep in mind. Okay, so with that done, let's click on Apply, and done. And now we can see here, if I click onto Jellyfin and go to Tailscale Web UI, this time we're accessing Jellyfin. We've got our little padlock here, so we've got SSL, and through a fully qualified domain name. So for me, jellyfin.fox-garibaldi.ts.net. Now, one thing to remember, now this is only accessible to devices that are connected to my Tailnet. So only me at present. So if anyone else online actually type that in, it's not going to go anywhere. But what I can do if I want to invite friends and family is I can go back across to the Tailscale website here, and then I can go to Jellyfin and I can click on to share. And here we just need to pop in the email address of anyone we want to share the particular container or really anything on our Tailnet, and we just click share, and that will be emailed through to her. Now, that's one way to share things, but you can actually share your whole Tailnet. With the personal version of Tailscale, you can actually have 3 users on your Tailnet, so you could actually give a full username to any friends and family that you wanted to. But just remember, if you do that, they will have access unless you set up some ACLs for everything on your Tailnet. So my preferred way is make people sign up for their own Tailscale account and then just share any device that you want them to have access to. So the great thing about having Tailscale directly in the Jellyfin container is when I share this out to other people, this container is the only thing that they can access. They have no access to my server, even though I'm running Tailscale on the server as well. So really cool. Okay, so it's some time later now. So now if I go back to crt.sh, let's do a search now for my Tailscale subdomain. So I'll pop that in and I'm going to click search. So now here we can see all of the certificates that have been created off my subdomain. We've currently got Andromeda and Jellyfin here. So like I said, if privacy is really important to you, then either don't use Tailscale Serve or make sure your names are very nondescript. Okay, so that's our first container with Tailscale installed. Now you can see now I've installed a second copy of Jellyfin so we can make some comparisons and that way be able to understand what's happening. Okay, so we can see here that with Tailscale installed that we've got this extra volume mapping here which we're using for Tailscale. But there's something else as well that's important that we know about, which also happens when we install Tailscale into a Docker container. It saves what's called the Tailscale states file, which is basically like its configuration, by default normally into /config, which is in the app data. So let me just bring up a screenshot of when we installed Jellyfin earlier. And we can see here, it says settings Tailscale state directory. It's in /config.tailscale_state. So let's close this and have a look in the app data folder for Jellyfin. So there we can see what it's created. And here's basically the config for our Tailscale for this particular container. Now, for most containers, this works absolutely fine. But let's just go across onto my main server here. And we can see all of these Docker containers. So we can see most of them have got the /conf directory. It's pretty standard in most containers. But if we go down here and we look at, say, Steam Headless here, well, this doesn't have a /conf directory. And yep, Steam Headless, I have got this going through Tailscale, and I'll show you that a bit later on. It's really, really awesome. Now, although Steam Headless doesn't have a /conf directory, okay, so you might be wondering, if this container, it doesn't have a /conf directory, then where's it going to save its actual Tailscale states? Where's it going to save the Tailscale configuration? Well, various containers that are known to have slightly different environments, well, the team, they've actually built in, so when we install these containers, it puts it in a different place. Now, for Steam Headless, this has been done. And let me bring up a screenshot of when I was installing this. So we can see here that for this container, the Tailscale states directory were put into /home default.tailscale_state. And so this directory, again, is in the app data. So we don't have to do anything at all. Now, looking down here at another container here, this Pi-hole container, you can see this is also running through Tailscale as well. And this one also doesn't have a /conf. And this container, it hasn't been auto-configured to put the states directory inside of the app data. So what I think we're going to do is I'm going to show you exactly how to set up this Pi-hole container. And I tell you, setting up Pi-hole in Tailscale is really, really cool. Let's go back across to the server over in Finland and set it up there. Okay, so let's get rid of this Jellyfin 2 here. Okay then, so let's set up a Pi-hole container on our Unraid server and have Tailscale integrated into that container. Now, for those of you who don't know what Pi-hole is, basically it blocks ads on your network. And you might think, well, why do we need to install Tailscale into it? Well, I'm going to show you a way how we can install Tailscale into this container, and then anything on your tailnet, if you want it to, it can actually block ads. So it's going to make Pi-hole be able to work from anywhere in the world. So you take your laptop on holiday, you don't want ads, well, you're not going to have them. Now, you might be wondering, well, what happens if the Pi-hole container actually stops? Will you still get internet? Yes, you will. I'm going to show you some special DNS settings we can use in Tailscale, and we can make sure that Pi-hole will work seamlessly. Okay, so first let's install the container. So let's do a search for Pi-hole, and we're going to install the official one here, BinHex's official Pi-hole. So let's click on to install. And also, obviously, another reason I'm showing you how to set up this container is because I want to show you when a container doesn't have a /conf, how we can actually put the states directory where we want it to be. So always with a container, I think, at least for the moment when we're installing Tailscale into the container, let's have a look down here, look at all of the paths and see if you've got a /config on the container side. Now, just to double check, you can just click onto edit, and the container path, you should have a container path /conf. Now, if you do, then everything's good, and you don't need to do any type of special configuration for your container. Now, you can see here, I don't have that. But what I can see here is I've got two separate locations that are going into the app data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use this location and choose this location here, this location inside of the container path. I'm going to copy it to my clipboard because I can see that's mapped into the app data for this container. So I'm going to click cancel here. Now let's scroll up and enable Tailscale. So obviously I'm going to call this Pi-hole, and I don't want it to be an exit node. I don't want it to use an exit node, and I'm going to keep Tailscale Serve enabled. And here now, the important bit, I'm going to click on here, show advanced settings. Now, there's various advanced settings here. Now, like I said, mostly we don't need to use these. But what I'm looking for here is the Tailscale state directory at the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in that location that I know is mapped across into my app data. And then /.tailscale_state. So with that done, let's scroll down to the bottom and pull down the container. Okay, so as always, let's click on to view log, and we can see that Tailscale is initiating and it's being downloaded. And here we can see the Tailscale state directory has been set to what we just made it. Okay, so let's authenticate this container with Tailscale and connect Pi-hole into our tailnet. Okay, so that's done. And we can see Pi-hole here. Okay, so let's close this and close these two. And here we can see that Pi-hole's running. So let's click onto it and go to Tailscale Web UI here. And here we are at the login page. And we can see the address here is piehole.fox-garibaldi.ts.net. So I could access this page from anywhere in the world, so long as I'm connected to my tailnet. Now, I don't actually know what the password is, so let's click on the plus here. And we need to copy this command, and this will allow us to reset the password. So let's go back to the Docker tab here, click onto the container, and go to console. So let's just paste that command in and type in a password. Okay, so the password's set. So we can close this and go back to Pi-hole here, and we can now log in. Okay, so this brings us onto the Pi-hole dashboard. Now, a couple of things I'm going to do before actually using this. I'm going to go down here to where it says Add Lists. And by default, we've got the Stephen Black add list here, which is a pretty good list. But we can actually add more lists into here. So what I'm going to do is up here where it says address, is I'm going to paste another list in here. Now these will be in the show notes. So in a comment, I'm going to put AdGuard. Now a good website if you want to read about block lists is Ethan Wren's site here. Again, this will be linked in the description. Have a read through here. And also another good block list here. This block list has 2.7 million domains in and blocks mainly ads and telemetry. And so it's basically the info from a few lists all merged together. So I'm going to copy this one and add this as well. Okay, so I've got 3 lists in here now. Okay, so with these extra add lists added, if I go to the dashboard here, we can see that the domains on the add list are remaining the same. And if I go to add lists here and I click on here, we can see that it says the list has not been downloaded. So to actually download the list, we need to go to Tools here, and we need to go on this button here, Update Gravity, and then click on to Update. So what this will do now is download all of the lists and update everything. Okay, so we can see it was successful. And now going back to dashboard, we can see we've got over 2 million different domains on our block list. Great. Now I'm not going to go into great detail about setting up Pi-hole, but this will definitely be enough to get you started. Now if we go to settings here, we can see here we've got DNS, DHCP. Now I'd recommend not to run this as your DHCP server, especially if you're going to be using this over Tailscale. But under DNS here we can choose what Pi-hole uses for its upstream DNS. At the moment it's set for Google. I'm going to uncheck that and I'm going to use OpenDNS, Quad9 and Cloudflare. So those are my preferred DNSs here. Now some of you might want to check use DNSSEC here, but personally I don't bother. Okay, so let's scroll down to the bottom and click on to save. Right, so Pi-hole is now all running, and we can see here, if I ever wanted to come into Pi-hole, say a family member at home, they can't access a website, wherever I am in the world, I can go to piehole.fox-garibaldi.ts.net. Wow, that's quite a mouthful, but I can go here and I could log in and either temporarily disable the blocking, whatever I need, it will be really easy for me to fix. Okay, so how do we actually use this for our DNS? So now before we look at integrating this into our system, I'm going to just go over to this website here. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of this website before, speedtest.net. Now, I'm using Safari here to open this because the browser I was just in actually has built-in ad blocking anyway. But we can see here, there's a whole bunch of advertisements. So let's minimize this window here and go onto our tailnet. And here we can see the Pi-hole container. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy its IPv4 address. And now let's go across here to DNS. Now, if I scroll down, we can add global name servers. So I'm going to add a name server, and the primary one I want is going to be the IPv4 address of the Pi-hole container. So I'm going to click on to save. So now the global name server for my tailnet is the Pi-hole container. And if I toggle this button here, override local DNS, what this will do is it will make sure that devices connected to the tailnet won't use their own DNS, but will use the Tailscale DNS instead. So what's going to happen is Magic DNS, this Quad 100 here, this will resolve all of my tailnet stuff. And then anything it can't find, it will then be sent to this upstream global name server here, which is my Pi-hole container. And so then Pi-hole will use these upstream DNS servers to resolve the queries, but also block any ads based off my ad list. And also what Pi-hole does is it does actually cache DNS, so it does resolve things pretty fast. Now, let's go back across to the Tailscale web UI here. Now, there's one problem with how I've got these things set up. So how this is set up is if my Pi-hole container goes down, then I will lose internet access. So let's just have a look at that before we go any further forward. Now, what I normally do here is I actually disable the Magic DNS and then straight away afterwards just re-enable it. Now, I find this kind of resets the DNS. It might just be me, I don't know, but there's no harm in doing it. And also, if we go up to my Tailscale icon up here, and I'll zoom in so you can actually see that. Also, I recommend we just disconnect from the tailnet and then reconnect again. And if I go down to settings here, we can see here that use Tailscale DNS settings, this is enabled. And if I click manage here we can see the resolvers that my computer's going to be using. So there is the Pi-hole container. Its IPv4 address is there. So I'm going to click onto done and close this. And let's zoom back out. Now I'm just going to open a terminal window and I'm going to just flush the DNS on my Mac. And now I'm going to reopen the speedtest.net website. So here we can see it with all of the adverts. So now if I refresh this, theoretically, if all goes well, all of these ads should just disappear. So let's give that a go. Okay, perfect. No ads here at all. Now, one thing we need to actually think about is let's minimize this and go across to Andromeda here. If I stop the actual Pi-hole container now, and now let's just go back to Safari, and now if I try and go somewhere else, we can see nothing here is working. So let's bring back up our terminal window here, and let's just try a simple ping google.com. So as we can see, it can't resolve it at all because Pi-hole's down. So this could be a bit of a problem. So what we can do is we can actually go back to the DNS settings in Tailscale and we can add another name server. So I'm going to add Quad 9 here, and it says it's also adding 3 more. So now I've added an extra DNS server. If I go back across to our Safari page here we are, we can see everything's resolving. If I go back now, we can see because Pi-hole's down, well, all of our ads are back. Now, so this might seem the perfect solution, and I'd say it is 99% the perfect solution. But there are a couple of things we need to keep in mind. Now, if I go across to the Tailscale documentation here, it just gives us some nuance about the order of DNS resolvers. It's not always going to just choose like a top-down list and start with the one at the top, and then if that doesn't work, go back down to the one underneath. Although, like, a lot of times it may well do that, but if the primary Pi-hole container is always really slow giving back its responses, it can just use the secondary one, even though Pi-hole is actually up and running. So that is something to keep in mind. So if you wanted to be 100% sure that it will always use the Pi-hole container, then you're going to have to just put just Pi-hole on its own with nothing else. But I guess there's something else you could do is if you've got multiple Unraid servers or an Unraid server in another location, well, you could have your secondary global name server as the second Pi-hole container. You know, that's something you could do if you wanted to. But I think this works pretty well. If I start back up the Pi-hole container now, and now with the container back up and running, now if we go back across to Safari, if I refresh the page, then probably these ads are still going to be here. So let's try that now. Yep, we can see the ads are still here. So let's go back across to our Tailscale here, and I'm going to disconnect from Tailscale. I'm going to open up my terminal window here, and I'm going to flush all the DNS. Okay, so let's reconnect back onto Tailscale. And whilst we're here, let's go to settings and have a look here at our DNS. So we can see here the pi holes at the top, and then there's quad 9 here, and then there's 3 other DNS servers that got added in automatically by Tailscale. So now we've done that, let's close this and refresh this page. Okay, so we've still got a bit of an issue here. So let's minimize this, go back to the Tailscale website, and here I'm going to disable Magic DNS and then enable it again. Okay, so like I said, I think this sometimes kind of resets the DNS. So hopefully it will consider this one a viable DNS to use again. Because it was down a moment ago, it probably thinks that this one's faster and may just be querying this on its own. So let's try again. So there we are. No ads at all. Ad blocking's working. But that's one thing to keep in mind is if you're using a fallback server, well, sometimes you might find you'll get ads. If the Pi-hole container's too slow, it will just use quad 9. But anyway, I think that's a really cool use of Tailscale inside of a Docker container. Being able to block ads worldwide wherever we are on our tailnet is pretty cool. But we do need to consider, is our Pi-hole going to always be up and running? If it is, and we're 100% sure, we can omit putting in a secondary name server here. But I think just for safety, just so you don't get a load of hassle if it goes down from family members, I'd recommend just putting in a secondary DNS as well. But also remember, if you don't put in a secondary DNS and you just rely on Pi-hole, and Pi-hole does go down, well, you can just go across and you can go onto your Tailscale application here and go to settings, and you can just untick use Tailscale DNS setting. So of course, with Tailscale DNS disabled, the internet's going to work fine. But one thing we'll have problems with is actually connecting onto our tailnet domain names. That doesn't mean we couldn't still be able to just take the IP address and paste that in along with its port number and be able to access our Tailscale containers that way. So not the end of the world if you wanted to not have a secondary DNS on your tailnet if you're using Pi-hole, but there's just a few different options for you to think about. Anyway, I think let's move on from this now, and let's go on and have a quick look at a couple of other containers that I think are quite fun to install Tailscale into. Okay, so now you can see these two containers here, and it's the same container twice, but they are slightly different. Now, I'm not sure if you guys may have seen my recent video. I'm not sure if that video is going to be released before this Uncast episode, but I have a video where we install this Windows in Docker container. Now, it's really awesome. What this allows us to do is basically install a fully functioning Windows install inside of Docker. Now, what it does is it does actually use KVM, but it Dockerizes it, and you can actually access it through a web UI, or you can use something like RDP, or even something like Splashtop. So, let me just show you something here, just while we're here, and you'll notice all of the different versions of Windows that can be installed. Now, you still do need to have a Windows license, so all of this is perfectly legal, in case you're wondering. But again, for full details of setting this up, then please see my video about this container. So, let's install Tailscale into this now. So, I'm going to call this Windows 11. Well, actually, Windows 11 container, I think. I don't want it to be an exit node, and I don't need it to use an exit node. And we're going to keep Tailscale Serve enabled. Then we can access this basically through Windows 11 container.fox-garibaldi.ts.net. Now, before we go ahead and actually install this container is very similar to Pi-hole in the fact that it doesn't have a /conf directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this directory here, as this is in the app data, for the Tailscale states directory. So let's go back into the container, toggle our advanced settings for Tailscale, and the state directory, I'm going to paste that in here. Okay, so let's scroll down to the bottom of the page. Okay, so let's install Tailscale into this container. Okay, so again, we need to click on View Container Log. And here we can see the authentication link here. So obviously, let's authenticate this container. Okay, so now that's connected. We can see it here. So now I'm going to close the log and click onto Done. And also I'm going to put Tailscale into this second one here. Great. So let's click View Log and authenticate this container. And here we can see both of our new containers. So let's have a look. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So now if I click Tailscale Web UI, there we are, I'm straight into Windows. And so this is basically a fully working Windows instance that I can basically just access over my tailnet straight over the internet. And we can see here at the top, the name is Windows 11-container.fox.garibaldi.ts.net. And I could give access to anyone on my tailnet to this particular VM in a Docker container. So really, really cool, I think. Now let's have a look at the other one here. Again, let's go to Tailscale Web UI. And here we are with good old Windows XP running in a Docker container using KVM. So pretty cool, I think, and it's totally secure. So you might be thinking, well, we could have actually set up a VM here, and then because we got Tailscale actually on the server itself, we'd be able to open up the VNC window over Tailscale. Well, that's correct. We can do that. But remember, it's opening it up using the IP address here, which is the Tailscale IP, which is the same IP as that of this server. The person with whom I shared this with would actually have access to the whole of this server. So that's one of the real advantages with being able to install Tailscale in individual containers, is it keeps it all separate, compartmentalized and very secure if we want to share things out, as well as it making it super easy for us to be able to access any of these things. Okay, so before we move on and have a look at the travel router, I think let's just have a look at one more container with Tailscale running in it. And again, let's do a fun container for all you people that like gaming out there. Let's go across to one of my servers here where I'm running the Steam Headless container. Now, for those of you who don't know how to install this container, well, there will be a video very shortly on my channel showing you how to do this. But basically what it is, if I go here and click Web UI and then connect, we can see here we're logged into a Headless Steam, where using this I can stream my games to another client somewhere on my local network. So what we can actually do, we can install Tailscale into this container, and then we can stream games when we're not at home. So long as we've got a good internet connection and a direct connection with our Tailscale, well, we can do gaming over the Tailscale network. So let's close this and shut down the container, and let's install Tailscale into Steam Headless. So as always, we just need to toggle use Tailscale onto on, and I'm going to name this Serenity Steam. Now I'm calling it Serenity as that's the name of this server. Now everything else we can leave as is, but in fact we will be coming back here momentarily and we'll be enabling this as a Tailscale exit node. Now you'll see why later on. I just want to show you why we need to do that, and so I'm going to show you it not with that in order to do that. Now, even though this container, it doesn't have a /conf, with this container we don't need to specify where the Tailscale states directory is. This one is known to the Tailscale Docker integration, and it will put its states directory into the container's app data here. Okay, so let's get that done, and click View Container Log. So I'm going to authenticate this into my tailnet, and here we can see the Steam container in my tailnet. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to connect an Nvidia Shield to this network. So let's do that now. Okay, so here we are on the Nvidia Shield. So I'm going to go across to the Google Play Store here, and I'm going to install the Tailscale app. Okay, so let's open that up and click on Get Started. Okay, so we're being asked if we want to set up a VPN connection, and yes, of course we do. So when installing Tailscale on Android TV devices such as the Nvidia Shield, we don't actually log into the Tailscale website like we normally do. We just scan a QR code with our cell phone and then log in from the cell phone. And what that will do on your cell phone is bring you into a login page like this, and we just sign in and then connect the device to our tailnet. Okay, so here we can see the Nvidia Shield TV has joined the tailnet. And we can see the same here on the Nvidia Shield. Okay, so next we're going to install Steam Link here. Okay, so let's open up Steam Link. Okay, so now let's click on Get Started. Now we can see here that it says it can't find any computers. Now this is normal because it's not detecting anything on our local network. And that's because we didn't install Tailscale, allowing it to be an exit node. Now you may think, well, yes, we can actually add a PC this way. So yes, we could click on Other Computer here and add the PC that way. It will then give us a number to put in our actual Steam. But the problem is it tends to use, I think it uses basically Steam's own remote gaming session where it tries to actually connect our two computers together. And I found that a lot of times that doesn't work very well for me, and that's why I prefer Tailscale. Now we could continue here, open up our Tailscale web UI into the Steam container, and then follow the instructions here to enter that number into Steam. But like I said, that's Steam's own remote gaming service, and if it doesn't detect the Tailscale network, it's not going to use that to make the connection. So anyway, let's go back now and redo it, but let's add to the container the Tailscale exit node. So what we want to do is make sure that the Steam Link software, it sees Steam Headless as a local device on the local network. And to do that is really easy. All we need to do is click Edit here. And if we go down to the Tailscale features, we want to tell this we want this to be an exit node. But as you can see here, we're not able to allow this to be an exit node because user space network is enabled. Now, user space network is always enabled when we have the network type set as host. So the difficulty is the Steam Headless container doesn't work in abridged mode. But what we can do is we can give it a custom IP. So I'm going to run it on this network here, Bond 0, and I'm going to give it an IP. Let's give it 10.10.20. And something that I'm probably not using. I don't know, 233. Oops, 233. I'm sure there's nothing on my network using that. So now when I scroll down to here, I can now allow this to be a Tailscale exit node. So with that done, if we scroll down to the bottom and click on to apply, and I'm going to click view container log again here, and we can see that Tailscale is being injected again. And if we see here, it says the exit node has not yet been approved. And so that's because we need to go back into the Tailscale web UI here, and under the Steam container, if we go to the right and click the three dots here, we need to just click edit root settings and then allow this to be an exit node. So I'm going to click on to save here. So now let's go back across to the Nvidia Shield. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to uninstall Steam Link and just start again from the beginning. So let's reinstall it. And before we do anything, let's just double check that I am still connected to the cell phone. And yep, Galactica 2, I'm still connected. So next I'm going to go back to Tailscale now. And then under exit node, I'm going to choose I want to use Serenity Steam. So now hopefully when we go back and we run the Steam Link software, we can notice this time it can see the Steam Headless container here. So it sees it as if it's running locally. So I'm going to click on the Steam Headless here and it wants us to enter this code. So I'm going to open the Tailscale web UI here. I'm using the Tailscale web UI just because if we were doing this away from home, then we'd still be able to actually access the container. So 3299. Okay, so I can now exit this here. And the network test is complete. So now I can grab my controller and click on to start playing. And so let's play Black Mesa.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Oh, pardon me, Doc.
Okay, so I think that's pretty cool. It's one way to do gaming when we're away from home. Now, obviously, you don't need to use Steam Link. You can just have Steam installed on another laptop and stream directly to that. Now, talking about being away from home, I think it's time that we have a look at a travel router. But that's in the next part of this Uncast series, so I hope you can join me for that, where we take a look at setting up and integrating Tailscale into our travel router.